Hello and welcome to the Holy Hour podcast. It's the bi-weekly All Cure podcast. I'm Gavin and I have a very, very special show for you guys tonight because I am joined by Roberto Olivardia, PhD from University of Massachusetts. I'm going to ramble off here. You got a long list of amazing credits here. So we got a clinical psychologist, right? So we got lecturer in psychology at Harvard Medical School. You have your own practice, co-author of Adonis Complex, How to Identify, Treat, and Prevent Body Obsession in Men and Boys. And hosted season 2, I believe it was, of Understood Explains podcast, which focused on ADHD in adults. And you were the guest on heaps of podcasts, as I was just mentioning to you, that I enjoyed listening to. Way more creditable podcast than this one, even. But to top it all off, you're a diehard lifelong Cure fan. So welcome to the Holy Hour, Roberto.
Thank you for having me. And, I have to tell you, I love the podcast. And, for me to talk about, music and the Cure, but when I hear you guys, you in your own bubbles, you realize, I'm obsessed with the Cure. I'm so into the Cure. And then you hear people like you're like, wow, there are people that are like really that know so much more. and it's just great. Like, I feel like I was, amongst friends, hearing all the various podcasts. So I'm like, I would love to be on the show to just talk about the Cure and also just in the work that I do as a psychologist that, the Cure have the fact that they've explored so many layers of humanity and emotion and what they've meant to me sort of, growing up. And I know for a lot of my patients I've worked with over the years where music is such an important vehicle for their mental health. So I'm glad to be here. I was looking forward to this all day.
Yes, likewise. And like I said, just checking out your the work that you do out there is amazing. And just rambling off your credits here, it's got to be nice when people get excited about reading off your accomplishments and stuff. It's like, I gotta read all this. I'm screwing it up. There's so much great stuff in here. It's like every mother's dream to have this listed under your name in an email. So it's got to feel good that you're doing so much good out there in the world. And and like you're saying, with the Cure, it's a lot of big emotions with this band. So I think it does fit in this world anyway of the podcast. Really, have to step back a few times and be like, well, are we like really overdoing this a bit, or what's going on here? Are we like over dramatic about this band? Does every band have this podcast? I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't think it's over dramatic at all. I mean, I think there are, and what I love about your podcast is just there are so many layers to their music and who they are, and just to me, the Cure represent a group too that their genre of just different. Each album has its own real character. I would say even more than what I would see with other artists that can really vacillate from, an album like Pornography to the collection of singles on Japanese Whispers. Is like, what? Like, is this the same band? Right. And yet there's this thread throughout all of their music, and it's just always been very meaningful. I think
that really does speak to the diversity of the, and we try to not dwell too hard on the diehard levels of fandom, and so because there are going to be just greatest hits level fans, and that's fine too, and then there's the people that know every B-side and know every unreleased song. And
that's me.
So it's pretty cool to be able to scope that all out. And one of the early things of starting the podcast even was how much it was me and my childhood friend from 6th grade, kicked off the first batch of episodes, and a lot of it was just revisiting these albums from our childhood that are still such a huge part of our heart and everything, and wondering how much is the nostalgia versus the greatness of the music, and it's like, At a certain point, in episode 100 and whatever, I'm like, nah, it's not just a weird nostalgia thing. This is there's something more to it than that. And I think the new album in particular kind of just shows that I could, feel this fanatical about something that I didn't even have any attachment to, until hearing those songs. And now I feel like they merged in. So maybe that's a good place to start with. As we start in the present, then we'll go all the way back to the origin story, as we love to do. Yes. But were you happy with the new album? Were you satisfied with it?
I love the new album. Cool. Love it. And I saw them in Atlanta for the album. So I'm a through and through Bostonian, and I could not get tickets to the show they played here in Massachusetts. And I'm like, I am not missing this tour. So where are they playing? What's the closest place they're playing next to me? The tickets are available. It was in Atlanta.
Okay. Cool.
I got tickets. I flew to Atlanta, and I love the new album. Like, to me, also just knowing, the background of Robert Smith's loss, of losing his parents and his brother, and just, again, to me, it's this album of these layers of humanity, of dealing with various kinds of situations and the complexity of those situations in a way that I feel he writes and they play in ways that's not cliche and just kind of cuts through. It's not hyperbolic, it's not dramatic. It just kind of is there and so organic. I mean, from the first song on, I loved it. It actually is one of my favorite albums. And to your point, I had that same thing of like, how much of this, like, there are albums that are just nostalgic. Yeah. But you're right. It was almost like a good controlled experiment where here's a new album that there's no nostalgia around, and yet I am loving it and just bathed in it. Like, it almost reminded me of how I felt about Disintegration the first time I heard Disintegration. But I can't wait for the next one. And to see it live and to be like, oh my God, the magic of seeing them, that was what, 2023? Did I see? Yeah, that 2023. And to know the first time I saw them, which we can get into the origin story later, in 1987, and be like, this has the same magic as it did that many years ago. I mean, I love it. I'm a huge fan of the new album.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Great to hear that you think it holds up too. And it's and that whole idea of hearing the songs before the album, it was different, so it was like, it was definitely, as you heard the weariness at various times in episodes, I was, is this the right way to do a Cure album? We don't know, but at the same time, it was new, it was a different way. So I love it in hindsight. I was like, that's so cool, because we had a different approach to, how we going to bring these songs into the full catalog. But let's go back to the beginning then in the old time machine. Is you dropped a few dates in there, which is I'm already like on the edge of my seat, so I want to hear about how did this all get started for you, and do you remember the first time of any Cure experience?
100%. I remember it. I have a crazy long-term memory about things like this. So just to give you real back. So I grew up in a family where my dad had a very extensive vinyl collection, a lot of Latin music. He loved the Beach Boys, ABBA, Linda Ronstadt, the Eagles. So I grew up with like music always playing in my household, and a real appreciation for music and lyrics, and how there are a lot of different creative ways to talk about love, to talk about pain, to talk about, and obsessed with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. And so always, so it was like my dad's music, and then I'm the youngest of three. I have an older brother and sister, and then it was like their music. My brother was into Pat Benatar and Def Leppard, and my sister loved Sean Cassidy and Donny Osmond and Donna Summer. And then for me, my first, like when I was 10, was the Go-Go's Beauty and the Beat album. Like, We Got the Beat, like that, the drums on that song. And I just fell in love with their music and that pop punk kind of style, and got into the Ramones and Blondie and, you know, all of those bands, and always loved that. And they were one of my favorite groups. And then I'll never forget. So I grew up in the Boston area. My family did not have cable, even though I wanted MTV so badly. But my parents, thankfully, were more interested in saving money for college, you know, as any middle class immigrant parents would do. And I was like, why can't we get cable? But they also knew who I was, because I would have been glued to it at 24 hours. But our version of it in the Boston area, there was this like local channel, channel 66, and they had like the Boston version of MTV was called V66. Okay. So for any of your Boston listeners out there, they're going to remember what V66 was. And they played local videos and whatnot, and then, you know, national videos. And I'll never forget, it was 1985, so I was 13 years old, and the In Between Days video came on. The first time I ever heard of The Cure, saw them. And Gavin, when I tell you, it was almost like the first time when I heard We Got the Beat, you know, I was in music class when somebody brought in the single, and I heard the, you know, of the drums, and it just electrified me. In Between Days, the song, but also the visual of that video, and how kind of weird they looked and all that, but yet it was very playful. But the lyrics are, you know, I could die, like, and all of these. I love that sort of combination.
Happy sad is this it? It's the weird.
And honestly, what a lot of people don't know about the Go-Go's too is that even though their singles were sort of more the kind of happy, but a lot of their songs, their lyrics are actually really dark, but they're set to this sort of happy music. And The Cure, I saw that in them, but coming kind of from a very, very different angle. I was like, oh my gosh, who is this band? Like, I love them. And it's coming at an age too, right at the beginning of adolescence, where, you know, you're just trying to figure stuff out. I really didn't like school. Like, I hated school. I have ADHD. Like, I was a very bored, like, I'm like, this is not, you know, my environment. And then it turns out I later get a PhD, but it's only because I locked into psychology and loved it so much. And I'm like, oh, this is easy. But there was a lot of stuff I didn't like before that. I was like, I have to go. So there was this record store near my house called Strawberries Records and Tapes. And I had some allowance money and I saved up. And they didn't have the single, but they had the whole album of The Head on the Door. So I'm like, I'm buying it. And I remember going in my dining room where the big stereo console was, plugging in the headphones, started with In Between Days, which I love that song, and then Kyoto Song being the second song. And there was something about like the darkness of that was so appealing to me and just spoke to me at that point in my life. And I was like, oh wow, this went from like this poppy kind of song to this like very dark song, and then you have, you know, I'm paralyzed by the blood of Christ, and you know, the next song, and I'm like, whoa, it just kept getting better and better to the last song, Sinking, which is still, I mean, one of Simon's my favorite bass lines are in that song, Sinking.
It's so beautiful.
I heard the whole album, and then I heard it again, and I heard it, like, I think I literally listened to it like 4 times without stopping. Like, it was just, oh my gosh, who is, and I thought they were new. I thought they were a new band. And then it wasn't until I went to the record store, I think like a week later, and I said, I asked the person, is this like a new band, this band, The Cure? And luckily the guy was a Cure fan, and he said, oh no. He goes, there's a lot.
Very cool.
And he introduced me, and he showed me all of their other records. And I'm like, okay, I'm in this.
Bring it
and the second album I got was 17 Seconds. And it was only because it was on, like, it was discounted. And so I was like, I'll get that one next. And then that, like, Secrets in a Forest, those 2 songs in particular were like, oh my gosh. And it just,
Yeah, I'm always curious of how the back catalog unfolds for people, especially back in the old days where it was kind of just whatever they had there, So like you're picking and choosing, and it would be that magical feeling of going back to the record store and be like, what is this one, And then sometimes you just be like, all right, well, I must have them all now. And then sometimes something would appear. But yeah, that's a cool jump because especially we've always kind of said too that Head on the Door is like the perfect introduction one, in a sense where it really is the really concise, golden era Cure where you can, get the super poppy, then you got, the dark weird, then you got the real dark weird, then just the classic sad at the end. And, so it really is like the perfect kind of thing. And it's just short enough where you can't just keep playing it over and over again,
Have the songwriting.
So it's perfect. Wow. So yeah. And that was like, it must have just come out if the video was on and stuff. So that was right in 85 then. And
1985. Yep. And it was one of those moments I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that in this very moment I turned on the TV to watch V66 and this video came, because I didn't have MTV. I didn't know about 120 minutes. And I mean, that wasn't, but 17 Seconds I loved. And then I remember the next album after that was Pornography.
Yeah.
And every album I just fell in love with, more and more. And then Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me had come out, like when that got released. That was, again, it was like, oh my gosh. And then they were going on tour. And so now I'm like, I have to see this band. And I remember the concert ticket was $40, which in 1987 was a good chunk of change, and I was like, who is going to, it was in this venue called the Worcester Centrum, which is an hour from where I lived. And I didn't know anyone who had a car. I mean, I was 15 at the time, and I just bought 2 tickets. And I'm like, I'm going to find somebody to go with me.
Pick up a hitchhiker.
Seriously.
You drive. I'll just wait out here. We'll go see the show.
Exactly. And it turns out it was a friend of mine. She asked her mom, and her mom was kind enough to drive us. And it was August 7th, 1987, that I saw them for the first time live. And that, oh my gosh, it was just it was, I'm like, this band, hearing their records was one thing, seeing them live was like a whole other thing. And I actually tried to put together for this podcast and think I've probably seen them at least 18, 19 times.
Okay, awesome.
Every tour. Certainly in Boston. Sometimes if they played 2 nights, I would see both nights.
Cool.
I saw the Reflections tour in the Beacon Theater in New York.
Yeah.
I saw them at that show in Atlanta. Like, I never will get tired of them.
Yeah,
there are some bands that you like when you're younger and you're like, I don't really into them anymore.
Or even if it's weird. Like certain bands I love, but I feel like I've kind of just maxed out, after that show number 5 or something, I'm like, the new albums are even good, but I feel like I've gotten the experience, it's not going to change that much, but something about the Cure always like, I mean, they're so great about mixing up the sets. I think that helps, but at the same time, it really feels like it's a whole new thing every tour, like you're getting this whole new experience. And that's great. So that's pretty much every tour then you caught them on, and that's cool.
I've seen every tour that's come to the New England area.
Do you usually see them around there other than the few?
Typically when they've come to Massachusetts, but like Reflections, it was just in New York. I'm like, I'm going to the Beacon Theater in New York, and saw them there. And then the Atlanta show was because the Boston show was sold out. But they're usually good at stopping. We have a lot of good venues in Massachusetts. And
they're not gonna
and then it just continued to escalate. And like, even the funny thing about going to the Atlanta show is when you talk to other people, who are there, and all the people around us, we all started having this great conversation before the band came on, and none of us were from Atlanta. There was people who traveled from Tennessee. There was a couple that traveled from Kentucky. So like people who couldn't get tickets in their home state. And we all were in
And
Atlanta.
that would have been the closest one for us, actually. But I ended up missing Atlanta because I did the Northeast ones. We went up there, and I did, like New York and Philly and Maryland there, and then skipped that one and did the Miami one at the end. But it was,
wow.
Yeah, so it was like kind of weird, and it kind of bothered me because I knew a lot of cool people were going to the Atlanta one too, and it was technically the closest. But I was like, it's like, can I squeeze one more in here? It's only like 3 hours away from us, but you can see how it gets addicting for the people that follow them around, and you're like, well, all right, one more one. I might as well go to that one.
Yeah.
If I'm over here, I might as well keep it rolling. But so yeah, it's very cool.
And they're the only band too. I mean, because they played long shows, I could go, like the Reflections tour, I could have sat there for 6 hours, like listening to them. And they're probably the only band that I could really do that and
it gets
not
tough
get bored.
for some bands. Like I have other bands I dig, and you are kind of like in the back of your head going, all right, I think we could wrap it up now.
Right.
The Carrie, you're arguing with your friend the whole way home. Oh, they didn't do this song. They didn't do this song. It's like you really could just keep them rolling all night, especially if you're not, squished in the front or something, you're just got your cozy little seat or whatever. But yeah, that's wild. So I always love the idea of, how much the Cure changes with the pop versus the dark, and what initially hooks you. So, I mean, I guess you kind of answered that question already with, In Between Days might have been the first hook, but, with Head on the Door, you get a pretty fast taste of every variation of the Cure in a sense, But I guess once you heard like Pornography or anything, did that not seem weird at the time? Like,
oh, it seems so weird. Like Pornography seemed, I remember getting it, and it was at the beginning too of like, where it was almost it felt rebellious to me, which was very appealing because I was a pretty mischievous, rebellious kid, and
you're like, this one's for me, all right.
It was so, the darkness of it, and it was unlike anything, before. I mean, I just, remember, even like certain lyrics, like in Siamese Twins, like, worms eat my skin, like freshly squashed fly. Like, I was like, oh, like it just like these lines just excited me. And it felt on some level like, oh, should I even be listening to this? Like, because it just seemed so, and as someone who has always been, and I, became a psychologist, like, but I've always been interested in like the human condition, where people are coming from, with this, and that also was very intriguing of this person, because you can tell they're so organic and so authentic. So I'm like, what was going on for this person or this guy that is creating that? And that, really intrigued me. And so pre-internet, I would go to bookstores, I remember, and like any music book or anything that talked about like their story and whatnot, to try to get an understanding of, what was going on. And then I became a fan of Susie and the Banshees because of The Cure and The Glove, and just hearing how, where Robert Smith was, particularly, during, Pornography and The Top, which is, The Top has its own level of derangement.
Go ahead. Say.
I was saying, but it really, it was so dark, but there was something really just grounding about it, because, as an adolescent, who you're just kind of trying to figure out like your place in the world and things like that. There was something about that felt very validating, on some level of like, this is someone who's just putting it out there. And there was such an assertiveness of not feeling like shame around these sort of dark feelings and saying, we're just going to embrace it. And it's not encouraging darkness in anyone. It's actually doing the opposite. It's more saying, hey, don't judge yourself for this, because this is just part of humanity and living
that's
that way.
A great point. And that's something I was even going to bring up to you later, but perfect place for it here is I've often heard, it's always that idea of like depressing music. Do you embrace it more? We'd done a episode on Halloween where it was a religious guy that Chaz had brought in it on his radio show. He was basically scolding this girl because she was listening to depressing music and she needs to put on something happy to snap her out of it, and I'm like, but there's a huge value in just embracing it, right? I feel like that's kind of where I was always at, where like, if I'm down, I want to put on something where I don't feel alone, and I want him to say the things I can't say, and and at a certain point, probably good to throw Close to Me on or something that kind of brings you out slowly, but at the same time, if you're doing Same Deep Water as You like all day on loop, it might be getting real bad, but at the same time, is that a valid thought then? Is like,
no, that's 100% valid. And as speaking, from the more psychological view, that, research has shown this, that, music, this notion that depressing music makes people depressed is actually not founded in the empirical research. That studies show, to your point, that when we feel, a very deep kind of emotion, we're first seeking a sense of validation and connection to it before we want to get out of it.
Right.
We are first seeking a sense of, what is this? Because I'm feeling this for a reason.
Right.
So we're looking for some sense around it. And even though on one hand, it's kind of a weird thought, and we all have, a lot of us have had it. I've certainly had it, where we can think I'm the only one in the world feeling this way, because we don't see sort of representation of it. And then you hear a band like The Cure who is singing it, the music is speaking to you about it. Especially with pornography, like the tribal sort of aspect, to it. I was just quoting actually to a patient of mine who is has depression, and he's a big music fan, and he's a lot younger, so I'm turning him into a Cure fan. And I said to him, one of my favorite couplets is from their song "Fear of Ghosts," which is not, a pop; it's a B-side. But to me, sums up what depression is for a lot of people, and it's that line that says, "The further I get from the things that I care about, the less I care about how much further away I get." And when I said that to him, and he was like, "Oh my gosh," he goes, "That's exactly, what it feels." And so in that moment, he's elevated by this line that's about depression. And that's what music does to us, is it elevates us strangely out of that, because we're feeling a sense of validation, a sense of community. And here, like you said, somebody's articulating this thing that is so complex sometimes, and especially for a young person, even as adults, it can be complex, but especially if you're a young person who's going through, like I am a very emotional person, that is like my nature. And I like that, but the slippery slope sometimes of being a very emotional person is things hit you hard. And The Cure were such a great vocabulary for me of making sense of this, and not shying away from that sort of darkness in that way. And so, I remember my parents, they were a bit concerned about, like I'm hearing the Go-Go's and the Beach Boys
all of a
and
sudden.
the Ramones.
It's
And then
like,
suddenly,
what's
it doesn't
going on,
matter
bud?
if we all die.
It's like, totally.
And they're like, "What is this?"
Yeah.
And when they saw pictures, I remember I had a poster, and it was the Top, the group that was in the Top, and they were like, "Who is this?" I'm like, "Oh, it's this new band, The Cure." And I remember when I didn't have my headphones on, so I had the music playing, and Kyoto's song, A Nightmare of You, of Death in the Pool, and they're like, "What is," like, it was so different from, and I think it horrified them a little bit that this guy, he's speaking to me, like they're all speaking, to me. But luckily, I think because my dad was such a lover of music, that he knew like that this is a good thing, like
Yeah.
whatever it is that, because there is a difference between someone using music in a as almost like a conduit for something that's destructive, which
Right.
isn't going to be helpful. But I would tell you the majority of my patients, music is a very therapeutic tool for
Yeah.
them and something that I talk about with a lot of, my patients, in
Yeah.
different ways.
Yeah, it seems like it's got to be. I know. I'm sure it varies just on how much of a music fan you are or what, but at the same time, yeah, I mean, it's like such a touch reset button for me in particular. I feel like it's like anytime, it doesn't even have to be anything super dramatic going on, or if I'm just slightly thrown off, I'm like, all right, stop, put on like an album that I've, is usually a Cure album,
Yep.
but at the same time, it just kind of embraces you. You get your level head again, and especially
Yeah.
older, like you're saying, now you have the kind of grasp on the emotions and stuff more. But as a kid, when you get rattled, it was all I could do is put on the music and reset, and I
Oh
think
yeah.
it's got to be that way for a lot of people, especially Cure fans. I think we have our different go-to albums of when, the angrier
Yep.
side versus the, romantic side or the lost side or whatever. But
Yep.
so yeah, it's pretty wild. And yeah, I kind of joked that I'm like, oh yeah, it's a little weird. My parents weren't more concerned when when I was having my it's like plastic disintegration on loop, But like you said, I think my mom was such a huge music fan and understood that we just constantly listened to music together, and so she could kind of see that I was working through it, and nothing too scary going on, but at the same
Yeah.
time, but I always laugh her. It's like, you don't want to get disintegration too much as a kid, like where if you're really understanding especially like the song disintegration or something,
Yes.
it's like a lot of it's just the moods and such, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty awesome. And a lot of it too, I was gonna ask you as far as the origin tale of like, so while you were getting in and digging into those early albums, was it mutual friends you had too? Were they in on it, or was this kind of a solo journey?
Yeah, it started off as a solo journey. None of my close friends were really into it, and just in like school, it was like more people into like pop stuff.
Yeah.
And where I found that community was so in Boston, there's a city, Cambridge, where Harvard University is housed in Cambridge, and Harvard Square at that time was like almost the little mecca for punks to hang
Okay.
out. And so there was this particular small area of Harvard Square called the Pit, and all the people with mohawks and green hair and everything, which was really radical back
Yeah.
then, if you have. And I'm like, and there was Newbury Comics, a record store, which was right in Harvard Square, where they would have all the imports from The
Yeah.
Cure. So that was like the real cool store because they had like the Faith Carnage Visor
Yeah.
cassette tape that no other place had, and the picture discs from England. And I'm like, these people, I'm sure, are gonna be into The Cure. And so I remember there was this kid, and he had a leather jacket, and he had a patch on his jacket of like The Cure. And he said, "Oh, how long have you been into The Cure?" And that just got me into this whole group of people, and that was that community. And that was when I was 15. So it was right after the Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me album came out.
Okay.
And these were kids who really spoke that language.
Yeah.
And we were obsessed like with Cure stuff. And
Yeah.
we would just for hours just talk about almost like that's what, hearing your podcast brings me back to sort of that era of my life of
Yeah.
talking to these people just about this.
Awesome.
We would have a conversation just about Simon's bass lines and
Yeah.
something, or the silliness of Love Cats, or the album covers, like who is what favorite album cover,
Yeah.
and I mean just all of that. So
Totally.
that was definitely a very important peer group, for those couple of years, especially of, and then when The Cure when Love Song hit big,
Yeah.
then they got a little little more mainstream, and then there were some people that are like, "Oh, I really like this band, The Cure," and I'm like,
Yeah,
"Yeah, I've been telling you that for like the last 3 years."
yeah. It is a fun part of this journey of like it still going to this day of like seeing where people come in and where others, like, and
Yeah.
that was a huge thing all through like high school. The big one for me, I guess, was Wish by that point. Like when, like Friday I'm in Love in
Mm.
particular, there was a lot of, because that was my freshman year high school. And then, me and my buddy were already diehards after, Disintegration and stuff.
Yeah.
But then people were jumping on board with Wish, and a lot of time it was cool. You'd get a few new, like Wizard of Oz, where you pick up a few friends along the way. But then there was a few of the ones I'm like, this dude's into The Cure now. I don't know, man. It's like you're a little
Yeah.
skeptical. It's like this is a poser or something, and then they would drop off after Wish, or drop off at Wild Mood Swings, or drop off, and then come back
Yes.
around. So it is pretty wild, but that's cool. It was you had a lot of it was for us. I'm sure similar, like you're saying, getting the books and stuff, and because we didn't have a
Mm.
ton of the media stuff floating around, and like every little photo you found of
Oh.
them was like kind of a whole gold mine itself, and you get like that 10 Imaginary Years book or the visual
10 Imaginary
documentary.
Years. I remember when that book came out. Oh my gosh, I couldn't get home fast enough to just
Yeah,
read it cover to cover and to see these pictures that I had never seen before.
yeah,
And oh my God, I loved that book because that was like the first time I remember really getting that glimpse into them, that was all consolidated. Because other than
yeah,
that, it was piecing together just articles and
yeah, yeah,
Cream magazine and a little article in Rolling Stone and
yeah.
um but yeah,
And
that was
seeing
that
it
was
in
a
a
biggie.
timeline and stuff too, like, or I felt like,
Yes.
I mean, I'd looked at the tapes and knew the dates from the copyrights, or I could line them up. But at the same time, it was great getting all the visual to be like, oh, this is when he really got weird, and then this is when it came back again, and then
Yes.
so it's pretty wild, which is very cool to get those visuals and then stumble across the posters of whatever era, and
Yeah, I just remember too, which was, it's so funny, I'm sure for young people to imagine a life without Google and the internet.
right,
But I remember when I heard so when the Standing on a Beach singles, came out and Charlotte Sometimes on there, I'm like, where is this song? Like, I
yeah,
don't have this on an
right,
album. And that was like a whole other thing of like, wow, in the UK, a lot of people release singles that are never on albums. Like that was
yeah,
that wasn't common sort of with American bands. And so I'm like, where is this song? And I thought I must be missing an album. Like, and I
right,
remember going, I think it was called All Music Guide. It was one of those books that have like the
yeah.
discographies of bands. And I had all of, the albums up to that point. I'm like, so I don't understand this. Charlotte
Where
Sometimes,
is
like what?
it?
And then that was the other thing when the Staring at the Sea, when the video collection came out, that also,
Yeah,
oh my
that
God,
blew
I'll
my
never
mind.
forget that.
Yeah, that
Blew
was it
my
was
mind.
it was so cool because we had been out. Like, I guess it had come out maybe before Christmas. I vaguely remember because I remember getting it, and I was like heart beating out of my chest, like, oh my god, I didn't even know they had videos, kind of thing. I hadn't seen any
Yes.
of them, and my mom was super cool and was like, just watch it now. You watch it twice maybe, and then we'll wrap it up for Christmas. And I was like, all right. That's just that feeling. I was just like, oh my God. Oh my God. It was just like each video was like this weird visual of it. And yeah, like you
Yes.
said, it was definitely Christmas before Christmas at that point, where I was, so
Well, I
excited.
remember seeing the 10:15 Saturday night video, and it did not compute to me that that was Robert Smith. I
Yeah.
mean, it was like he looked so different in
Yeah.
that I'm like, is someone lip syncing him? Like, what is his whole face, structure and the hair? I mean, he
Yeah.
was so young, like in that. That was like mind blowing. And then the evolution of these weird, videos but oh my gosh, yeah, because I hadn't seen any of those
Right.
videos up to
Yeah.
that point, except like In Between Days and Close to Me. Those were the
Okay.
only two
Yeah.
videos that I had seen. And then, here's Caterpillar and like Love Cats and I mean, and that was the other thing too, is, going back to, when people connect to things. I think with a band like The Cure too, when, a lot of people who maybe gravitated to them because they were going through, their own stuff, that when you hear a band like The Cure and they're singing these like dark, deep songs and also have the capacity to do songs like Love
Yeah,
Cats and Let's Go to Bed, it to me that really signifies a sense of, as deep as you can get in something, there is this other layer and element where you can almost look at the absurdity of life, in
true.
some ways, and
Yeah,
flip
that
the
makes
switch, flip the frame,
right.
where it's like, because part of me when I was at that age, I'm like, are they, is this just almost like a parody of like how absurd and silly life is, or do they have a sense of humor? But clearly they
Right.
did. Like Love Cats is a funny video. Like they
Yeah,
have
let's go
clearly
to
a sense
bed
of
or
humor.
something. I was like, what is
And Let's
it?
Go to Bed,
Yeah.
that was also, it was very permission giving around, you can be authentically dark and authentically silly at
Yeah.
the same time. Because even amongst those friends that I made, it was interesting that like a lot of them would sometimes get wedded to the idea that if you were a Cure fan, you couldn't be happy or silly,
Right.
and I'm a very silly person. Like
Yeah, likewise.
I can laugh about the most immature, things. And I was like, no, I feel the duality of both of those things, and
Yeah.
they both seem real to me. And I felt that The Cure just gave permission where they didn't box you into, you just have to be like depressed or dark. And it's like,
For
no, you could be
sure.
silly and you could be in love, and you can also then have a hate song where, like
Right.
Shiver and Shake, where you're
Right.
like calling the person a bunch of sick,
Right.
holes
Totally.
that
Yeah.
run like
It's
sores.
totally. And yeah, to those extremes too,
Yeah.
and that's how I was kind of like, I love in a sense that, I came into it, right before disintegration, I guess, 88, kind of thing. And by getting like standing on the beach first, I felt like it almost adds more credibility to the super sad songs, knowing that he had Love Cats up his sleeve still, and then, like you say, it seemed
Yeah.
even maybe on a level I didn't even understand at the time as a kid, of knowing that you could be pornography level sad and angry. But if that guy was there and he's still singing Love Cats a few years later, then there's hope for all of us, kind of thing,
Yes.
it's like, it's
A
like,
100%.
so it's just cool because it was like, it made it more like, all right, well, he's not, if every album was like pornography by the fifth one, you'd be like, all right, dude, what,
Right.
what's going on here? Are you just
Yeah, we
doing
need an
this? Or,
intervention.
it's like, or if every album was, super poppy, you'd just be like, this is annoying. This is,
Yeah.
this is, yeah, so enough of that. But, yeah, so I think it really does add a lot to the credibility levels too. And I think something we always talk about here is it's amazing too, as far as the emotional levels and being able to identify with it, of how great so many of their songs are versatile that way. Where a song,
Yeah.
a lot of those disintegration ones in particular, because you have like the singles like Pictures of You. It can be the saddest song you've ever heard if
Yes.
that moment's going on, or you could just be hanging out and it's a cool single, and it's
Right.
catchy, and you're totally fine with it. Just like Heaven, even it's like, people's wedding songs, but in the end, where is she dead? She fell off the cliff, or like what's going
Exactly.
even the come back, go away of In Between Days, it's like it can morph pretty easy into like a really sad song, or depending on your mood, and that's genius. It's songwriting, really. I mean, I don't know.
100%. Yes.
Uh,
And that was very apparent to me when I was young too, around I can, yeah, I can attach to this in whatever way is useful,
yeah,
for me. And that's exactly how I felt about those songs. It's like you hear these lyrics, it's like, yeah, I mean, this woman, just like Heaven, like, did she drown or she died and whatnot? But it's this catchy song, and it's also celebrating sort of love, and it
yeah,
has these just different elements to it.
right, yeah, yeah. I like that, and I wonder if the adolescence in particular, of because your emotions are going back and forth so drastically, I wonder if that's why these bands click so well with young people. You know, it's almost one of those things I never like to even mention too much because I think that their maturity level is way beyond some adolescent band. But I think it's pretty safe to say too, a lot of these bands really do click with, you know, adolescents, them or the Smiths or so, you know. But
Oh,
it's like,
totally.
but I think it is because it's that drastic push and pull of 1 minute you're love cats and the next minute you're, you know, same deep water as you. So
Oh,
maybe,
definitely. I mean, like even with Kiss Me, Kiss Me too, like to
yeah,
go from the kiss,
right.
this aggressive, I mean, oh my God, it's still the that guitar is so aggressive sounding and you're just into the like the swimming into the music and then those lyrics are venomous, you know,
Yeah,
kind of lyrics. And it ends, and then you go into Catch, you
right.
know, which is this whimsical, and he's like, do, 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 do.
Yeah, it's like no
Like,
reason. I was just thinking about that today. I did a little mini episode of Boris's new side project band for the Patreon, and I was kind of surprised because that one has like where the moods are all over the place on it too, and something
mm,
about just Kiss Me in particular. It's just like that album should not work as far as the flow and everything. But you know, I credit
exactly.
Dave Allen, I credit Boris, The Cure, everyone. But somehow there's like a common thread of all those songs. You know, because Wild Mood Swings, that's kind of the thing, is it's kind of all over the place. It definitely has its bumps in the road. You know, it's
Yes.
got great songs, but at the same time, it doesn't flow like that. But somehow Kiss Me just totally pulls it off, and it still baffles me to this day of like, why does this work? You know, it's like a double album of working.
Absolutely. It
So,
is so but I remember first listening to that and I actually started laughing when Catch came on and hearing that because
yeah,
I was like, oh, this is just hilarious. It was almost like hilarious to
yeah,
me that you go from this like aggressive sounding and then there's torture, you know, after that. And then
yeah,
there's the psychedelic, like if only tonight we can sleep. And then of course like Just Like Heaven, which is one of my all time favorite songs.
yeah,
And then it ends with Fight, you know, which is again this sort of like aggressive kind of punch. But to me, again, that's the beauty of The Cure. And often something that can, you know, that does come up sometimes in sessions I have with patients who are aware of their music, of
hmm,
the landscape of emotions. Like they're talking about all of these kinds of things, you know,
yeah,
and giving people permission to sort of engage with all of these aspects, you know, that yeah, sometimes we can be like super mad, you know, about something and then just get, you know, lost in something that's sort of whimsical
yeah, yeah.
and free and but I just remember literally laughing out loud when Catch came on. I was like, this is not the song I would have expected
Nah,
coming
yeah, it's really
from
weird
the Kiss.
sequencing, but it's like, all right, it works.
But it does.
Yeah,
It
somehow
totally works.
you just like, all right, you don't need to rock anymore from here on out. You know, it's and yeah, I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess along those lines, do you remember your initial reactions to like Disintegration then when you're about two
Yeah. Oh my
albums
gosh.
in and the whole back catalog at that point, so release day and all that?
Yep. So Disintegration. So when Disintegration came out, excuse me, I don't think I had, um, no, I did have no, I had Boys Don't Cry, but I didn't have the Three Imaginary
Yeah.
Boys yet, so, you know, with some of those like earlier songs.
Yeah.
But with Disintegration, I thought the cover was different because it was the first cover with his face, you
Yeah.
know, on it. And that seemed like, oh, this is interesting. I wonder, you know, if there's anything unique about this, you know, with the fact that I mean, pornography, their faces are like blurred
Yeah.
um, and then the lush sound of like Plain Song, which is still, I mean, honestly, there's so many songs of theirs I'll say are my favorite
Yeah.
songs, but
That's what he goes.
I I got lost in it and that song and loved it. And then Pictures of You, that is, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. And then Close Down, like I was like, oh, this is okay. Like it didn't grab me in the same way. Love Song,
Yeah.
I loved. And then Fascination Street, that was a single. So I had heard that there was a radio station in Boston called WFNX, and they were the alternative radio station. So I had heard that song before buying Disintegration.
Yeah.
But I remember Plain Song, Pictures of You, and Prayers for Rain were, I mean, oh my gosh. But then like all of those songs, I was like, I felt like I was almost in the presence of like a masterpiece, because it is. I mean, that is my favorite Cure album, is Disintegration.
Okay. Yeah,
hands
I was gonna
down.
ask. It's
Yeah.
it's hard to top. You know, we always try to find a way around it, but it's pretty much all comes back to that. And it's so weird too. Like that's why I love when people did live through it, and and that wasn't a back catalog one. It's cool because I was so into it at that time, where I knew it was like, this is amazing, but it was so weird just knowing that this is like a masterpiece in real time. And it's you know what I mean? And I still don't know if I've ever really come back to that feeling of, of like listening to it. I'm like, but I didn't want, declare there will never be another greatest Cure album as this. I was just kind of like, wow, these guys just keep doing it, man. This is amazing. Almost, if anything, I take it for granted, where I was like, well, the next one's going to be even bigger than this one, On some level, maybe I did think Wish at the time was, next level or whatever. But it's wild to think that living in that moment of listening to something and being like, yeah, this is pretty damn flawless. This is everything I wanted in my life at that point.
It was flawless. So. And I remember thinking too, wow, this is very different than Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, because there is such a consistency to Disintegration. Like it's like Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me is the anti-flow album, like you said, but it works. Disintegration to me is that, and Pornography to me are like the ultimate flow albums. Like it really, you are on a journey with that record. And I remember feeling that with Disintegration. Like this is like a story being played out. Unlike, I didn't feel that way about the other records. Like in the 17 Seconds a bit. Well, I'm sorry, with the exception of Pornography. I definitely felt that with Pornography. 17 Seconds somewhat, but with Disintegration, I thought the listing of the songs was in the perfect order. Like you just wouldn't change anything of it. And then I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I cannot wait for this tour. Like they have to tour, because this is a record I definitely have to see. And they played 2 nights, and I saw both nights it was called Great Woods Arena at the time. And I got tickets to see, and I remember friends of mine being like, you're seeing them like the next day, like again. I'm like, yes, I am absolutely. And it was just as magical the second night. The set list was a little different. They played some as they normally do, but they still played all of the songs on that record. And
that's great.
I absolutely love that album.
Awesome.
Absolutely love it.
That is awesome. Yeah.
Is that your favorite as well?
Yeah, I think, yeah, pretty much, yeah, for sure. But and I didn't get to see them till Wish, and I remember it was kind of the same deal where it was, all the buzz of the cool kids at high school at that point, and I was like, I'm not missing this, because I was trying to see them for Disintegration, but I was just too young. I was looking at the wrong place in the newspapers and stuff, and I thought they would be like in the one paper, but I was like, nah. And then I saw a girl wearing a Prayer Tour shirt one day at school, and I was like, what? One, who the hell are you? Two, I was like, I missed it. That's how it was broke to me, was I saw the tour shirt, and I was like, no. So I wasn't gonna let that happen for Wish, but I felt like such an idiot, because it didn't dawn on me I could just go to both nights. Like maybe my parents were like, pick one. I don't remember, but I remember like thinking, because then I had friends going to the second night, and it was kind of more of the Paris versus show, where they threw in a few weird ones, and I was just like, oh man, I was like, I don't know, my night was probably better. Than like just years later, I'm like, I should have gone to both, man. What was I thinking?
Yeah,
but I had to get someone to drive me, so maybe that was.
So. I mean, luckily, my brother was very nice enough to like drive, both times. But
that's awesome.
I just, Yeah, I just remember being so excited when I first heard the Disintegration album of like this is gonna be amazing, like live. Like you're just gonna
Yeah,
feel
no.
like you're kind of swept into something. And um yeah, I mean the songs, and that's the thing with a lot of their records too. They're so timeless in ways. I mean, like you can hear pictures of you on the radio today and it's so
Yeah,
current
yeah.
still. I mean, it does not sound dated at all.
Yeah, none of it
In,
really. Yeah, it's like
in
yeah,
a
at
way.
worst, like maybe like Japanese whisper stuff just seems very 80s, but so much of that's
Yes.
come back that sounds just like some hipster band now too. I could
Yeah.
hear somebody
Yeah.
playing The Dream or something, and it would sound totally fine. But I mean, there's this
Yeah.
feel like the sax stuff is usually the only parts where it's like, all right, now they probably would have just swapped that out with a guitar solo nowadays, but at the same
Right.
time,
Yeah.
maybe not. I don't know. Now I'm so out of the loop.
Yeah.
But that's right.
Yeah. I remember the top was the album that I felt was I mean, I just remember listening to that thinking, ooh, this guy's
It's going,
falling on hard
yeah,
times. Like it just it
going through some stuff on this one. Yeah. Yeah, and
this
then in a weird
is
way. Yeah.
and then when I read yeah, when I read that, he was in the Banshees at the same time and doing the glove and and you're like, oh my gosh, like no wonder what this guy was so
Yeah.
burnt out. And I just remember like that was an album at first I didn't relate to it sort of in the
Yeah.
same way. Like it almost seemed like I actually remember feeling almost a little anxious listening to it, like,
Yeah.
oh, like something is so unstable, here. Even more than like pornography, strangely enough, is like certainly darker, but it felt there was a stability in the darkness
Right.
with
Yeah.
pornography.
There's like a focus.
The top,
And, just
it's like, like it just was like,
harmonicas and sitars and everything. For sure.
yeah, like,
But that's
what is this?
that's
And
great. It was early signs of your abilities of psychology there. I'm like, so are you okay, Bob? What's going on? Let's talk about this because
that's honestly how I felt. I remember thinking, "Oh my gosh, someone has to help this guy!"
Yes.
Like, but because I had heard that after Head on the Door, I
Yeah.
knew, okay, things
do work
certainly
out.
got better for him.
Yeah,
But
that's
when
why
I first heard that, it felt I like I remember like "Give Me It," like that
Yeah,
song. I
true.
felt almost like agitated,
Yeah, kinda.
but that's again the beauty of them because that's how he clearly was feeling. I mean, and it sort of just came through, in that way. But I've grown to appreciate that. It's not that I disliked it. I just didn't. Yeah, like Banana Fish Bones. I'm like, what? Like, what is that?
You never wanted to just play it on loop like you would Head on the Door or something,
Exactly.
It's always like, it was always my, when I'm sick of everything else, I would put that one on, like just be like,
Yeah,
all right, well,
that's how I am now with
Yeah.
it. That's funny you say that because that's what I'm like. Oh, let's put on like Piggy in the Mirror.
Yeah,
like, I haven't
let's-
heard that in a while.
Dressing up will be fun. Let's do that.
Yes.
That's awesome. So yeah, I guess a couple fun questions then of on the psychology side of if you were to recommend somebody, is there an ultimate song to stew in the sadness one that you would be like, you should check this out?
Yeah, I actually have recommended songs to people, depending on sort of where they are. I mean, my favorite dark Cure song is Siamese Twins. I love that song. Like I mean, there's so many lines in that of, I just walked away and grew old, and just the everything falls apart, broken inside me, it falls apart. I mean, there's so many lines that are just so brilliant. And you feel the other thing too, from a psychological point of view of where just music, but particularly with the Cure, is when you hear a song like Siamese Twins, you have such compassion for the speaker of that song, which we assume is Robert Smith. But like, so when I recommend to my patients, sometimes we hear it in session and I tell them, I want you to hear this first as like, here's the speaker of this song and how you feel about someone who's going through that. And they can generate the compassion and the empathy for, wow, I feel for that person.
Yeah.
And for something like depression, for people who struggle with depression, part of the nature of depression is you feel unworthy and you feel unworthy of compassion, for yourself, to the point for some people it can get to very dangerous zones of thinking of suicide and things like that. And with music and with their, word, you can have this sense of compassion of, oh my gosh, like this person is really struggling with something, which then we can bring back to ourselves and think, well, then why am I not deserving of that kind of same level of compassion? So Siamese Twins is one of those songs. Prayers for Rain is probably another one of those songs that's, again, that those sort of like lyrics around that. Those are the two that really, really come to mind when I think about. And then that the fear of ghosts, only because that couplet I love so much that I've recommended that song just for that couplet, alone.
Sure, at the right moment, that's great that you pulled from that. That's like one that I would be like, oh yeah, that's perfect. That's great. I'm sure, it would change for the person and everything, scenario of what the situation is. But do you have an ultimate happy song then to pull them out, or do you just let them find those on their own?
I love Just Like Heaven, even though again, like the lyrics could be interpreted, but as far as like the feeling I get with Just Like Heaven is always, I never, like, that's a song I will never ever get sick of. Ever, ever. Like the beginning of it, everything about how it's produced and everything, it always puts me in just a really good mood.
The way it just snaps in like that. We were talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame before we hit record there, and that was probably one of the coolest moments. You could kind of see it on the playback video on HBO or whatever, but it was really wild where everybody was loving their whole set to that point. I think they had done like Shake Dog Shake, a Forest, maybe even Love Song, and as soon as that, like everyone jumped up, and it was just like the fucking party had officially hit its peak at that point. It was just wild to see. No matter who the artist was, everybody was on board with this song, and it just delivered. Like you're saying, it just gets you. Something about that. He hadn't even said anything yet. The guitar riff hadn't even come in. It was just, it got him.
Yeah, and seeing that song live, like I think, like for me, when I see them live, I mean, I take it all in. But I love seeing Simon Gallup live, like the way he moves with the bass, and he is to me the coolest of the cool is Simon Gallup. Like, and with that song in particular, the way he just moves with those kind of bass lines, like that's like an additional treat to just see, like, this is a guy who's so in his element and just in it, and it's, but that's probably that's probably one. And then I love Cats. I think like just the silliness of it, and it's so catchy, and it's such a throwback to the good old sounding bass, the old fashioned bass of Phil Thornalley, and so that's sort of like one of those, like for someone who doesn't know much about The Cure. I mean, I remember the days of making like mixtapes and and I would purposely put like Love Cats and then put The Kiss, or something, and to really speak to the versatility. But I would say Just Like Heaven to me is the ultimate mood lifter. Like just that, the beginning and the structure of the song, and I love it. It always puts me in a good mood.
That's perfect. Yeah, because it is kind of if that doesn't get you moving or your heart going, then
right.
It's like Love Cats. I could see being like all right, I'm not ready for this yet. Shut up about cats. But like, it's a pretty perfect. Yeah. Well, dude, we always love to ask the time travel question. Is there a time, if you had to go back and see any era Cure, whether it's one that you did actually catch or beyond, what would be your time travel Cure show era or year?
Honestly, mine, it'd be a toss up between sort of the 17 seconds or pornography.
Yeah.
I think it would be so. I'll say pornography,
Yeah,
like
just
that
all-
that tour, like just to
Right before it
in that-
really fell apart. Or maybe if it did fall apart, you could help them.
yeah, exactly. Like just that idea of being the tension and that album, and with internet information, like I can see sort of all the Boston dates they did,
Yeah.
since like their first appearance in Boston was in 1980. So I was 8, at the
Yeah.
time. And so obviously I was too young to see them, but there's a YouTube video of someone who filmed it, and it's like just in this room. And I'm
Yeah,
like, can you imagine being just in this room with this band? Like, but pornography, because that's when the lipstick under their eyes and the hair, like the look, and to me the almost rebellion of it again just was so appealing to me as an adolescent. Like the idea these guys are really good at what they do, but they don't give a shit about what you think about them. Like they're just going to do their thing. And that's also another thing that's really appealing, is the assertiveness of the Cure. Like they don't bow to their record label. Like they don't, they have some pop singles, but they're also organic. Like it's not, I'm going to sit down and write a top 40 single for the record company.
Somehow they managed to make that rebellious, even of like, well, yeah, we are the dark band. Well, now we're going to put out this pop song. And everyone's like, what are you doing?
Exactly.
This is crazy.
Right.
Yeah, somehow they
Exactly.
made that
Can you imagine?
rebellious. Yeah, it's wild.
Right. Can you imagine a record company saying, you just put out pornography and now you're doing this Let's Go to Bed where you're painting on silk screens and like throwing beach balls? Like what?
Suicide, but, it's
yeah.
yeah.
But I love that, the assertiveness of this band, and particularly, Robert Smith, who just is so is particularly when YouTube came out and really having accessibility to seeing interviews of them like all around the world, and seeing, wow, this guy is so down to earth, in so many ways. But yeah, pornography would have definitely been, that would have been the era that would have been. I love listening online to those tours and the set lists of those songs.
Cool too, just in contrast of the full history of the Cure, of like how elaborate they get and how smooth with the layering, which is perfect. They're the best at it. But when you see those old pornography ones where it's a 3-piece, it's kind of thin, shit's like not really as tight, and it's like something about like slightly unhinged Cure is really appealing too, because we've just kind of seen them from like, it's crazy if they ever mess up even a slight hitch in anything now, they're so tight about everything. And so like the fact that he's just up there, they'll start making up some different words.
yes.
I
was just about to say that, I love when he just changes a lyric to something, because it just whatever, something took him over in that moment.
It's pretty wild.
And it's like, okay, I'll go with you, on that. But yeah, I think that the starkness of the trio too, and how primitive the music sounded, to me, it spoke to sort of the bare bones of what they must have been going through, sort of, emotionally. But yeah, that would have been the error to see.
Yeah, because even on that album, they do such a good job of it's minimal, but it's very atmospheric and stuff. And then when you hear the live stuff, you're like, it really just dawns on you. It's like, oh, the whole song is pretty much just the bass line over the drums, and he's occasionally doing a kind of thing. And he's just like, oh, you're just like, wow, this is not, as a kid, I put everything on such a pedestal. It's like, oh, I could never play that, and I'm like, wait a minute, all it is like the bass line and the drums, and he's howling and playing like that one riff with a ton of pedals. And so yeah, that's something I'd heard in other podcasts with you. Are you play drums? You're a musician yourself?
So I wish I could play guitar. That was the instrument I tried to play. But drums is what comes. I mean, I don't play drums now, but
Yeah.
I used to, and that's the instrument that just came naturally to me. Like I
Nice.
have a pretty good sense of
Yeah.
beat, and
Cool.
I used to, before having any access to real drums, it would be my brother's high school textbooks that I would lay out, and
Yeah.
I'd buy a pair of drumsticks, and
Nice.
and it was actually Pornography was one of the first records that, because the drum
Yeah.
beats are kind of
That's
simple, like in that way, that yeah, I love the feeling of, to me drums, there's such a power,
yeah.
to drums. But no, I've never been like in a band or,
Right on.
recorded music, but I, used to write songs, as a kid,
Yeah.
throughout high school. A lot of my, instead of taking notes in class, I was writing these morose
Yeah.
lyrics and
Totally.
inspired by The
Yeah,
Cure.
of course.
And yeah, so I mean, I still have, the fantasy that, I'll be a musician at, when
There
I
you
grow
go.
up. So
Yeah. Got plenty of time. It'll be fine. Awesome. Well, that's great, man. I don't want to keep you too long, so I guess we'll start the wind down there. And
yeah.
yeah, I guess yeah, so much together from all that. I really appreciate it and taking your time to talk with us, talking
Oh no,
Cure
thank
here,
you for
and
having me. I love the podcast. Keep doing what you're doing because it's so I just look forward to hearing and every angle that you guys, touch. It's like, oh wow, like I feel like I'm privy to these conversations that some of which I've had with past
yeah,
Cure fans and some which I never had. And I'm like, oh, that is a cool
cool.
topic that they're talking about. I've never had
Awesome.
that conversation with someone before. So thank you for having it. It's been a
No
blast talking
problem.
about The
Thank you so
Cure.
much. Yeah, that's awful kind of you. Like I said, I was listening back to your work. I'm like, wow, this is really important stuff that actually matters in the world. I'm like, it's got to feel good that you're doing so much good out there. So yeah, you keep it up, man. And
Well,
it's
thank you.
impressive. And I'm gonna put links to other episodes and stuff too, so people can hear your thoughts on things and just a lot of cool non-cure related stuff out there. So hopefully people will
Cool.
check it out too. And
Awesome.
yeah,
Thank
love,
you.
love to have you back anytime. And I know the other
Absolutely.
guys would have loved to talk to you too. So sorry you missed out on them, but we'll have you back with the whole crew there. And
Yeah, yeah.
that'd
I'd
be
be more than
awesome.
happy to.
Sweet. Cool, man. Well, thank you so much. And we'll catch you later.
Yeah, peace out. Thank you.
Talk hard. All right, thank you so much, Roberto. So lovely meeting you and getting to hear your Cure origin story. Thank you for sharing with us. But before we wrap up this evening, while we're on the topic of origin stories, I have yet another Cure origin for you guys. And this one is a self-recorded clip by our good buddy Matt Fischer. Longtime listener and friend of the show. Matt sent this to me a long time ago, and I wanted to save it for just the right moment, and I believe this is finally it. So let's hear how it all started for Matt.
Hey everybody out there in Holy Hour Land, this is Matt. Wanted to chime in with my Cure origin story. Surprised I haven't done one of these before, but yeah, here we go. So I just want to say first off, I'm incredibly jealous of anyone who was able to experience this group in their prime, anytime in the 80s or 90s, because that was not my experience. So I was born in 1984, just quick context, and I think I just would have been too young to really have latched on to anything from Wish. I'm sure just through osmosis, I must have heard Friday I'm in Love in the car, my parents driving somewhere. It must have happened, but yeah, absolutely no recollection of any videos or that being a part of my life. And then even through Wild Mood Swings and Galore, I could not tell you, and this is not for lack of trying, I just don't remember ever seeing any of the videos for Gone, 13th, Mint Car, Wrong Number, etc. So my Cure origin story is, as crazy as this is, was South Park in 97, 98. And Real quick, for listeners who are younger than 30, I know the show's still on the air, but it is just really to put in context, the show was fucking massive when it came out. Like culturally gigantic those first few years. And I'm talking about, having its own movie, having the merchandise, just having them in the pop culture. Kenny was quoted everywhere, and parents hated it and teachers hated it. And I think that's what made us like it more. But yeah, it was like a appointment viewing for me and my friends at that age. So the episode happens. I barely remember who Barbra Streisand is, let alone this nice bloke named Robert Smith. But what I am able to decipher, and they do a kind of a good job coding this and kind of setting me up for the iconography of this group, is the presentation. Like, okay, this guy has a cool hairstyle. Obviously, he's British. He made some album called Disintegration, which Kyle thinks is the best album ever. And that just kind of implanted in my head. And then as I go on and I'm getting more into music and going out of my wheelhouse, because at that point I was young enough, I was still 13, so a lot of hip hop. This is at the tail end of the East Coast, West Coast U.S. rivalry here. So whether you were Ride or Die, Bad Boy, Notorious B.I.G., or West Coast with Tupac, I kind of rode it out with Tribe Called Quest and De La Soul. Stayed neutral as much as I could, but yeah, just enjoyed music of all kinds. And it's the kind of thing where I didn't feel like any embarrassment listening to anything older or out of fashion. So like all my parents' music, Beach Boys, Beatles, David Bowie, I love stuff like that. And I would seek that out. So it's surprising that The Cure never came up. I never got exposed to it. And South Park was the first thing. So past that point, Blood Flowers came and went. And again, I'm like target audience for that thing. I'm 15, 16, and it just no market saturation in my area at all. And it's a bummer in hindsight, just because at that point I definitely knew who Depeche Mode and Smiths were and Joy Division, and big fan of their stuff. And if only they had some kind of video or single, maybe I could have gotten on that point and, hitched my wagon to them earlier. But it really didn't come until 2004. And this is a very special memory I have. I was with my friend Mike, and as we did this at this point in our lives, took a lot of road trips. So we played in bands together, and we had just a bunch of friends back then at different colleges. And this is the era where I was just young enough and willing to just travel anywhere at 2 minutes notice. So we were going to Raleigh to visit his girlfriend, and this is a 6.5 hour drive. I'm only saying this because you need to fill that 6 hours with some music. And the vehicle in question was a 1996 Honda Civic. It's my first car. And again, for the people under 30, the Zoomers, this is there no Bluetooth. Yeah, no aux cable. This is not a thing that we had back then. And I didn't have a CD player in my car. It was a tape deck. So tapes were extremely out of fashion by 2004. I don't believe they're really even sold retail anymore. So what we would do is we would go to all these thrift shops, and it was just a great time because you could take a chance on artists and bands you've heard before for like the cheapest price. This is how I heard REM for the first time. Out of Time was 50 cents, and now it's one of my favorite records ever. Same thing. I would go through and like there's Prince, okay. Parade, okay, the Parade soundtrack, cool. Throw that in, 50 cents, love it. And I would just experiment with all this stuff because it was so cheap, and if it was bad, who cares? Throw it in the trash. So anyways, I know I'm rambling here, but we go into the Goodwill, and staring right at me, I can remember it very vividly, even though like the rest of this trip is kind of fuzzy. I can remember this, actually holding the cassettes for Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me and Standing on a Beach, and just being really intrigued by the album art, flip around, Standing on a Beach. And I think by this point I recognize A Forest and Boys Don't Cry, but that would be it. And then when I flipped over Kiss Me, it might, maybe Just Like Heaven, but that's it. Like I really do not have any exposure. I couldn't name you any album tracks. It's that, but I know what Robert looks like now. I kind of have like a vague idea of what they sound like, sort of. But yeah, we get that. And on the way down, we play Standing on a Beach, and it was just fucking awesome because I don't know what I had in my head. I had like no real preconceived notion, but going in and hearing 10:15 and jumping someone else's train and immediately going, oh, wow, this is really cool. It's kind of like punk music. I love this a lot, really feeling it. And then each subsequent song, you're going on a journey. So now it's getting a little darker and we're getting a forest and we're getting Hanging Garden. I'm like, oh, wow, now we're getting like dark and goth. And then you get these sweet romantic pop songs like Caterpillar and In Between Days. And I love that side. And it really hit me. And then the Curiosity B-sides, I just thought like they were the coolest, most interesting things I had ever heard at that point. And the other thing I do remember about this trip, and I don't think I've ever told him this. I haven't seen my friend Mike in a couple of years now, but so I said I bought Standing on the Beach and Kiss Me, but I did not play Kiss Me on that ride down or back. Because once we were listening to Standing on the Beach and I knew I liked this group a lot, I'm like, I'm going to save Kiss Me for myself because I don't want to be talking over it. I don't want to have conversations. I don't want to stop at Wawa or to get gas. I just want to hear this thing in full, and I'm really glad I did. But yeah, right after that, I'm fortunate enough that this was right at the very start of the reissue campaign, which we can all admit kind of ran out of gas. But you got to remember at that time, this is not talked about a lot, but they started off with 17 Seconds. Three Imaginary Boys, 17 Seconds, and Faith. And these are the double CDs. So you get the remaster, you get the non-album cuts, you get the live tracks. And I was going in order that they were released. It was really cool. So, right after I got 17 Seconds, then I would go into Faith, and then I would spend some time with that and, go back and listen. And then we get Pornography in the top. And I did this right through Kiss Me, Kiss Me. And I didn't cheat or go out of order or anything. It felt really, as this corny as hell, but it felt like very special at the time. Like I was having my own kind of renaissance with them, even though while this is happening, the self-titled had come out and then Curiosa's there. And it just felt like this really big thing that happened in my life. And then, I deep dive. I'm like, okay, well, who played on what? Who's the producer of this record? Where can I get the B-sides? And then just became obsessive. And that's kind of where I am today. But yeah, I'll wrap it up with that. It's that Goodwill in 2004 with the 2 cassette tapes for 50 cents each. So I'm glad I snatched that up before another person came in. Because who knows, it might be Delamitri right now I'd be a big fan of or something. But anyways, love the show. Love you all. Hope all's good. Sorry this was so long. Peace.
Okay, there you have it. Another super cool Cure origin tale. Hope to have Matt back on the show soon sometime. It's been way too long. But thank you for sharing that, Matt. And sorry it took so long to get it out there to the world. But I wanted to find just the right place for it, as I said. So if you guys out there want to share your Cure origin tale, much like Matt did, it's a fun and easy way to do it. Just record yourself. Spilling the beans of how it all started for you, and I'll work it into an episode one way or another. It might take 8 months, but we'll get it in there. So thank you, Matt, and thank you, Roberto, for kicking off this episode. You guys are both awesome people, and we shall now conclude our episode with praise for the Patreon, Matt Fischer, who is also a Patreon member. So thank you, Matt, and thank you, Donna, and thank you, Craig, and Jeff Hilton, and Jeff Cortland Jones, and Sue, John, Alan, Allison, Dion, Namicio, Matt Ford, Tom Burns, Letty, John Roberts, Jason, Tony, Ben, Danny, Coulter, Tom Johnson, Francisco, Arno, Chip, Amber, Nicholas, Shirley, Jason Hall, Steve, Mara, Caroline, Brian, Sean, and Colin. And of course, Kate, who's the ruler of CureThreads.com, an online shop with tons of original Cure-inspired designs on a wide range of products. Kate also created the cover art for the recently reissued Just Like Heaven Cure Tribute vinyl, available at alr-music.com. And also check your local record shops. I was over at Grimey's in Nashville, Tennessee, and what do you know, they had a copyright there. So that was awesome to stumble across out in the wild. Kate also keeps the ball rolling over there at Cure Arts Collab on Instagram, so go follow that page and check out the lovely artwork by Cure fans like you. Scott Kruger is co-host of the Sarlacc Digest, an all Star Wars podcast that airs every Wednesday evening Pacific Time, 8 p.m. on YouTube and Facebook, with replays anytime you want to push the button anywhere you stream podcasts. Perfect for any level of Star Wars fan without all the Disney ruined Star Wars. Just a bunch of well-educated dudes sharing their love of a galaxy far, far away. David runs The Obsessive Geek on Etsy. It's an online shop full of tons of cool products that you should check out ASAP, including 3D printed recreations of the 3 Imaginary Boys and Boys Don't Cry album covers, perfect for redecorating any Cure fan's home. Dana is a super talented animation and illustration artist that is for hire, so check out her work at graphics.tv. That's graphics with an X.tv. Tanya would love to spread awareness of 988lifeline.org, a suicide and crisis hotline with over 200 crisis call centers located all over the U.S. and available 24/7. If you or anyone you know is in need of help, please reach out to 988lifeline.org. Tim is part of New Waterloo, an independent hospitality development, design, and management company that owns and operates a slew of hotels and restaurants. Find their many lovely locations at newwaterloo.com. Lisa recommends that you visit Dickens in Calgary, Canada for a great live show or event. See their full listing of events at dickensyyc.com. Or hit up the goth scene in Little Rock, Arkansas. Jessica will be out there at all the events put on by Club Nevermore, and you can check out their upcoming schedule events at clubnevermore.com. And of course, Jazz's other podcast. It's called the Excommunication Station, and it is where he and Chrissy secure their one-way ticket to damnation as they take on the evangelical church. New episodes drop every Wednesday everywhere you get podcasts. On your way out, swing by our new and improved official Holy Hour merch store. It's over at TeePublic now. The other one flaked out hard on me, so I had to rearrange everything, but the link is still in all the descriptions and everywhere that the old one used to be, and replaced it. So go check it out. Same cool Holy Hour designs on t-shirts and a bunch of other stuff, so wide range of selections. Go check it out. And that's all for now. So hope you guys had some fun listening to these origin tales, and I hope you cast your vote for the Cure Awards 2025. We're tallying up all the results right now, so check back in 2 weeks and we will have our big awards show to present the winner of this year's Holy Hour Cure Awards. Thanks in advance, and talk hard.